Okay, so good afternoon. Si
Good
Jasmine lang.
afternoon, sir.
Where are the others? Hindi sila ka-join. Sige. So we will discuss the design with functions. So I already gave this activity to you last meeting to study or to read, no? But kagina ko lang siya kagina ko lang ginbutang ang mga example na Python files para ma-check ninyo or ma-try to uh, examine the file. Okay. So in the early 1960s, so this is a case study. Case study ni siya ato nga pagka-istoryahan with in terms of the designing in functions, no. So we have samples of Python programs wherein ginamit siya sa case study. Ayan. So, ito, example. So, this is in early 1960s wherein the MIT computer scientist, so si Joseph Weizenbaum, developed a famous program called ELIZA. Okay. Yung din-develop niya na program na si ELIZA, uh, it can converse with computer user. So, it can mimic a non-directive style of psychotherapy. So, the doctor in this kind of is essentially a good listener wherein it responds, no, to the patient's by rephrasing them or indirectly asking for more information. And so to illustrate the use of data structures, develop a drastical this program. And example natin na program, I think available siya sa Neo LMS P, okay, doctor.py. Ayan. So isa-isa kung siya karon later on ang naka-define the function. Ato na siya isa-isa hon. Ayan. So this is the kita nyo sa kita nyo sa right. So the figure on the right shows the program's interface. .py amo ni siya ang magwagid. Okay. So example, siguro may nag-type so amo ni siyang first gid nga i-prompt ni Eliza. So good morning. I hope you are well today. So what can I. Yan. So mag-i-input si user. So ito na yung patient statement, no? Get. Then mag-read si Eliza, yung program mother and you don't okay, so it listens and it responds by rephrasing or indirectly asking for more, just like please tell me more. Yan. So when it enters a statement, program responds in one. So ano to na to? A random chosen hedge. So such as please tell and one is by changing some keywords input string and appending this string to a randomly chosen qualifier. So for example, my teacher always plays favorites. The program might say, why do you say that your teacher always plays favorites? So parang inappend niya yung bakit ganyan. So, so the program consists of a set of collaborative functions. Okay, so that share a data pool. So two of the data sets are the hedges and the qualifiers. So it depende sa imo later on if you create a program. So it depends on how will your program works as said. Okay, so for in this case, yung program na si Eliza, it intends to communicate lang. And it responds according to some hedges. Ayan. So two of the data sets qualifiers because the selections do not change, elements must be selected. So you also to represent them. Yan. So we already talked about discuss na siya previously. So their names of course are hedges and so niya dire of first person pronoun and the second person pronouns. For example, program is I, let's say nag I in a patient's input sa statement ni patient, ni respond with a sentence containing you. Okay? So the best data structure to hold these correlations is a dictionary. So meaning meron kang dictionary dyan na gagamitin natin as replacements. So, gamitin mo yung you. Ito yung gagamit ng program mo na sasalita para sa kanya. Ayan. So, the main function display. Okay, ito yung program natin, PY. So, it displays greeting. No? So, displays a prompt, user input. Ayan. The following code for the main loop. The main loop lang to. So, it is true. Running. So, it prompt for an input, no? So, kailangan niya mag-antay ng isang string input from, ayan. So, unless the patient or the user type quit, then the program will halt or the program will end or exit. Ayan. So, our therapist might not be an expert of kay Eliza na program, but there is no charge of its. So what's more, our therapist seems willing to go on forever. However, if the patient do something else, quit the program. Ayan. So para ma-terminate lang si Eliza PY na program, so just simply type quit. Ayan. So this defined ni reply in naka-enclose yung argument na sentence. Ayan. So the patient string as an argument, string as the reply. Implements the two strategies reply suggested in the analysis phase. So this function implements strategies for making replies suggested in the analysis phase. So a quarter of the time, a hedge is warranted. Otherwise, the function constructs its reply by changing the persons in the patient's input and appending the result to a randomly selected qualifier. So depende dire nakadepende kung ano ang input ni user or ni patient, then saka siya mag-choose no kung ano nga qualifier iya nga paggagamiton nga mag-respond dito sa iya nga statement. Ayan. So may mga example kita kagina no. So just let's say ito. My dad and I get along fine. So ito yung qualifier statement niya. So can you explain why instead of I, so binalitan niya yung your. Why your dad and you? Ayan. So my, pinalitan niyang your and I, pinalitan you. So may mga qualifier, may mga hedges tayo na ginamit dyan. Ayan. So mga example na ni siya. Okay. So otherwise, the function constructs its reply by changing the persons in the patient's input and appending to the results of the randomly selected qualifier. Ayan. So the reply function calls yet another function. So meron dito, kung makikita nyo sa code ng ating doctor.py. So we have here the change person. Okay? So yung change person na to, na function, so it performs complex task, no? So this performs complex task of changing person. Ayan. So meaning kukuha siya ng mga hedges dito, so randomly, and then kukuha siya ng qualifiers. Then sa kanya i-append or i-change niya. Ayan. Ayan. So the change person function extracts a list of words from the patient's string. So, meaning, ini-evaluate niya yung in-input na statement ni patient. Okay? Ini-evaluate niya. So, ini-split niya, ina-append niya, then nire-replace niya. Ayan. So, ito yung change person na function dun sa program natin. So, it then builds a new list wherein any pronoun key in the replacement dictionary is replaced by its pronoun value or pronoun or value. So, this list is then converted back to a string and then returned to user. Or i-return niya, yun yung constructed or new constructed statement niya na i-reply niya kay patient or kay user. So note that the attempt to get a replacement from the replacements dictionary either succeeds and returns an actual replacement pronoun, or the attempt fails, no? And then, so if ever na mag-fail siya, it will just return the original value or original word nga type ni user. So, kumbaga, kung wala siyang mahanap na pronoun or kung wala siyang mahanap na phrase na or hedges na pwede niyang i-substitute doon, so ibabalik niya lang yung salita na yon. So the string method join, okay, so we have here the join method. So it glues together the words from the reply words. Ayan. So in-append mo, first in-split niya yung sentences by words, and then kukuha siya ng replacements. Ikukuha siya ng replacements. And then sa kanya i-append or idadagdag niya or ibabawas niya or i-replace niya. Ayan. Tapos gagamitan ng join. Yun na yung pagbuo ng new statement. So when it comes to implementation naman, when it comes to coding, so the structure of this program resembles that of the sentence generator developed in the first case study. So the three data structures are initialized near the beginning of the program and they never change. So the three functions collaborate in a straightforward manner. Okay? So kung titingnan natin yung doctor.py, okay? So I will just share. Ayan. Ayan. So ito yung doctor.py na program file. So kung titingnan mo, ito yung hedges natin. So under siya sa random. So hedges tayo. Ayan. So please tell me more. Ito yung parang universal niya na hedge. Pag wala na siyang ma-reply. Then make mga qualifiers. So why do you say that? Then i-add na yun or i-append na yun yung statement ni user. Then, or you seem to think that blah blah blah, or can you explain why? Yan. And then replacement. So instead of I, papalitan niya ng you. Me, of course, you pa rin. Then my, so your. Then we or you, then us, and so on. Ayan. So, ayan. So simple lang. Ito lang yung ano niya. Ito lang yung naka-defined na functions natin. So meron tayong reply functions. Meron tayong change person. Okay, so this is still nasa sentence siya. Okay? So yung sentence dito is, ito yung input. Okay, so ito yung in-input ni user. Ayan. Ayan. Okay, so yun pa rin, reply. Then change person and so on. So ano na to? Naka-loop to, naka-loop. Okay, naka-loop. Ayan. So testing. So as in the sentence generator program, so the functions in this program can be tested in a bottom-up or a top-down manner. So as you will see, the program's replies break down when the user addresses the therapist in the second person. So when the user inputs contractions, for example, I'm and I'll, when the user addresses the doctor directly with sentences like, you are not listening to me, and many other ways. So titingnan natin, no? So try natin siya i-run. Then gagamitin natin yung mga example na yan. Oops. I will share my entire screen. Ayan. So irarun natin siya. Tapos, ayan. So good morning. I hope you are well today. What can I do for you? Titingnan natin, no? So let's say you are not listening to me. Ano kaya yung nire-reply niya? Ayan. So why do you say that you? Wala na. Yun lang yun. Ah, yun na yun. Ano pa? Uh, what can I do for you? How are you? Save it. You seems to think that how? Parang may mali, no? Ayan. So hindi siya kompleto. So hindi siya perfect na parang real person talaga. Okay? So the design is going back sa ating discussion. Yan. So design is important in many fields. Okay? So syempre pag alam mo yung ikaw yung design ng program mo, ng code mo. So alam mo talaga kung saan yung may mali. Alam mo yung pag-troubleshoot, alam mo yung pagdi-debug, alam mo yung kung paano i-replace o i-modify yung program mo. So, for example, the architect who designs a building, di ba? The engineer who designs a bridge or a new automobile, and the politician, advertising executive, or army general who designs the next campaign must organize the structure of a system and coordinate the actors within it to achieve its purpose. Design is equally important in constructing software systems, some of which are the most complex artifacts ever built by human beings. So today, we will explore the use of functions to design software systems. So, tingnan natin. Ayan. So a quick review of what functions are and how they work. So we have done built-in functions before, di ba? So ano yung mga built-in functions like math, di ba? Random. Ayan. And we briefly discussed how to define functions in previous lessons. Di ba? So we just use the def word and then your function name and then yung arguments mo or yung statements mo. Ayan, para magamit mo siya. So before we delve into the use of functions in designing programs, it will be a good idea to review what we have learned about functions. So first, a function packages an algorithm in a chunk of code that you can call by a name or that you can call by name. So for example, the reply function in the doctor program builds and returns a doctor's reply to a patient's sentences or sentence. Second, a function can be called from anywhere in the program's code, including code within the functions or including the code within other functions. So during program execution, there may be a complex chain of function calls where one function calls another and waits for its result to be returned and so on. So systematically siya, per line, okay? Per line siya. Per line yung pag-call. But in case of the defined function, so either lang na iya. So wala na siya wala na siya what do you mean by that? It doesn't align with the step-by-step procedure with the use of the defined functions. Kaya man, let's say ara ka na sa last lines ng mga program and then gintawag mo tong defined function mo sa pinakababaw. So it is okay. Okay lang na siya. Kay that is a defined function. Hindi naman siya yung written code talaga. Okay. So ito yung for example in the doctor's program, the main function calls the reply function which in turns the call calls the change person function. Then the result of change person function is returned to reply, whose result is returned to main. So kumaga, pinagpapasahan lang nila until such time nga matapos yung flow ng program. Okay? Kasi yung define function 1 na to, balik tayo dito Wait. Wait lang natin to si Doctor. Wait. Tingnan natin. Uh-huh. Parang may dumoble pala ata dito. Ayan. Tingnan natin. Check ko wait. So, share natin ulit. Ayan. Ayan o. So, kung titingnan natin, dito tayo sa reply. Ayan. Okay. So, kukuha siya ng hedges tsaka qualifiers. And then, i-append niya yung change person. So, sino ba yung change person dito? So, dito siya. Sa change person. And then, babalik niya kay reply. Okay? Tama ba? Ayan. Ayan. So, nag-append siya dito sa words. Okay? So, ano siya? Kumuha siya ng mga qualifiers dito sa reply. Then, sinama niya yung change person. Tapos, babalik siya kay main dito. Kasi yung ipiprint ni main, ito yung nakadefine na main function. Ito yung parang head niya. So, kasama dito yung reply. Ito. Yung reply na to. Yung reply sentence na to, andito. Di ba? And kasama dito, si change person, which is nandito siya. So, naka-define functions. So, meaning, yung defined functions natin is hindi systematically na magkasunod. Di ba? Pero, under these functions, ito yung magkakasunod dapat. Okay? So, this is enclosed with the defined functions. So, ito yung mga kasama niya na naka step by step. Yan. Okay? Yan na yan. So, third, a function can receive data from its caller via arguments. Okay, so yun na yun. So, for example, the doctor's program reply function expects one argument. So, let's say a string represents the patient's sentence. So, however, some functions like those of the sentence generator program need no arguments to do their work. So, meron namang iba kasi depende rin sa program na gagawin mo. So, it might be, it will reply to a specific sentence, just like the ELIZA program, or nothing, or no response, or just like empty lang din talaga, okay? Or there's no argument to do that work. Okay, so depende man sa imong program. Then the fourth one, so when a function is called, so any expressions applied as argument are first evaluated. So their values are copied to temporary storage locations named by parameters in the function's definition. So naka-stored lang siya virtually, temporarily, naka-stored siya. And the parameters play the same role as variables in the code that the function then executes. So, di ba, kung mag-assign kita sa variable, meron siyang value. So, temporary storage lang na siya da. So, the same as this sa atong nga parameters. Okay, so it also stored temporary sa aton nga storage locations. Ayan. So a function may, fifth, no? So a function may have one or more return statements. So kung napansin nyo kanina, with the use of the doctor.py na program. So maraming return statements doon. So ang purpose niya naman is to terminate the execution of the function and to return control to its caller. So sino ba yung unang tumawag kay reply function or kay reply defined na function? Si main ba? Kung si main, pag ginamitan mo ng return na statement, then babalik siya kay main. Okay? So just like in-append niya yung change person, then sa function sa code ni change person, may return doon. So babalik siya doon kay reply. And then si reply naman, pag nag-return siya, babalik siya kay main. Kasi si main yung uh, tumawag sa kanya. Diba? Siya yung final na output. Kumaga. Yan. Ito. So may example din tayo dito. So the doctor's programs reply function returns either the value returned by the random.choice function. Ito yung randomly chosen sa hedges natin sa qualifiers. Yan. Or the value returned by the change person function. Yan. So if a function does not include a return statement, so Python automatically returns the value to none to the caller. So kung hindi tayo nag-specific or hindi tayo nag-specify ng return value doon kay reply tsaka kay change person na function, yung makukuha nilang reply or makukuha nilang value doon is none or empty or wala. Or wala talaga. Ayan. So with these reminders about the use and behavior of functions under your belt, you are now ready to tackle the finer points of program design with functions. So titingnan natin kung kaya. Yan. So functions as abstraction mechanism. Thus far, the programs and exercises you make has consisted of all algorithms and data structures expressed in the Python programming language. So much better no kung ang mga sa mga exercises na bala, much better kung you can include some comments or let's say saan yung head ng program nyo. Include some comments no, yung hashtag natin or pound sign para malaman natin yung yung flow ng program code nyo. Ayan. The algorithms in turn are composed of built-in operators. Okay? So kasama pa rin dyan yung built-in operators natin. Control statements, calls to built-in functions. So if you can still remember, no? If you can still recall yung mga built-in functions natin na diniscuss. And programmer-defined functions. So yung mga programmer-defined functions, ito yung ginawa na ng mga programmer na pwede nyo makopy or pwede nyo gamitin. Ayan. So strictly speaking, functions are not necessary. Okay? So pwede naman talagang program mo na as in, program lang talaga. Walang built-in functions or walang defined functions. Pero in terms of troubleshooting, debugging your code, pag may mali, iisa-isahin mo yon line per line. Diba? So unlike na i-compress mo siya or isi-separate mo siya or i-divide mo siya by defined functions, just like what the doctor.py na program na may sariling defined functions lahat, so easily you can detect where is the error. So doon ba siya sa kay reply function? Doon ba siya nag-error sa change person and so on. However, in any significant program, the resulting code would be extremely complex. So yun yung tinatawag natin na very, very difficult to prove correct and almost impossible to maintain. Okay? So mahihirapan kang i-upgrade, mahihirapan kang mag-add ng feature, mahihirapan kang mag-update or mag-debug. Yun lang yun. So kaya tinatawag siyang extremely complex pagdating sa programming na hindi ginagamitan ng defined functions or built-in functions. Pero kung gusto mo talagang walang kumopya, let's say gusto mong 100 lines of code na ikaw talagang gumawa, tapos ayaw mong i-share sa iba, eh, huwag ka nang gumawa ng defined functions, no? Pero it's for your own good naman. It's for your own sake naman with the use of the built-in functions. So the problem is that the human brain can wrap itself around just a few things at once. So psychologists say 3 things comfortably and at most 7. So people cope with complex developing mechanism to simplify or hide it. So this mechanism is called an abstraction. Ito na yung tinatawag na abstraction mechanism sa function. Most plainly, an abstract detail and thus to view many things as just one thing. So kumbaga, mo siyang group, ginirop mo yung mga ano mo, yung mga defined functions mo. Ano siya? So we refer to the most common task in everyday life. Example, on ka nga or maglalaba ka nga. So ano yung process ng paglalaba? Di ba? So it involves fetching dirty clothes from the hamper to whites and color. Di ba? Tapos lalagay mo siya sa pagkatapos na pagkatapos mo ba lalagay ano mo itutupi mo, fold mo. And then lalagay mo siya, di ba? So simple lang magsalita, di ba? Doing my laundry. Ano 'yun? Naglalaba lang ako, naglaba lang ako. Meaning maraming process involved. Damit mo, hiniwalay mo yung puti sa di color, di ba? And so on. Without most of our activities would be possible to discuss or ika nga, di ba? So mahirap kang i-explain. Lang, mo siya. And so on. So likewise, effective designers must invent useful to control. This lesson, we examine the various ways in which function mechanisms in a program. So, first, we need to eliminate redundancy. Ano yung redundancy dito? Ito yung parang the same, different functions, pero yung process niya is same. Di ba? That function serves as abstraction mechanisms is by eliminating repetitious code. Yun. So, to explore the concept of redundancy, so tingnan natin yung function named sum. Okay. So, ito yung naka-ano rin din yan sa yung sa tingnan nyo na lang. Sa loob. So, here's the definition of summation followed by a session showing its use. So, ng lower number, then i-return result. So, yung is to sum up from the lower up to the upper. Summation includes of 1 and 4. So yung lower number is 1 and the upper number is 4. So that is 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 10. And dito naman sa 1 plus 53 and so on plus 1. Ito yung natin. Okay. So if the summation function didn't, so the program would have to write a summation. Diba? Uulitin mo naman yung type ng program na ganito. equals then so ito na naman ulit. While kung mita mo siya ng close siya or naka-group siya as a defined function, that is summation, you just simply call the summation defined function mo na summation. Then, ka na magta-type ng ganito lines of code. Diba? So, actually, cast na naman siya previously, no? And defined functions. Advantages and disadvantages niya. Yan. So, in a program that must do multiple summations, the same here multiple times. In other words, the program. So, code redundancy is bad for several reasons. So, ano yung una? First, the program laboriously or copy the same code over and over and to get it correct. So, adding in yung feature, ito yung sinasabi natin na pag nag-upgrade ka ng bagong feature or nag-add ka ng bagong feature, get more efficient, he or she instances of the redundant code throughout the program. Okay? So for example, summation ka ng 1 and 4 tsaka 50 to 100. Diba? So, ito yung ginawa mo. Dalawang ganito na line of code. Tapos, gumawa ka ng multiplication. Eh di times 2 mo rin gagawin yon, di ba? Times 2 rin. Unlike na gumawa ka ng or naka-enclose siya sa defined functions, dito ka lang i-edit or dito ka lang mag-upgrade or mag-add ng feature sa defined functions mismo, hindi na sa buong code mo. Di ba? Kasi yung tinatawag lang naman nila is yung summation of functions. Okay. So as you can imagine, this would be a maintenance nightmare. So imagine ano pa lang yan, two times mo pa lang yan ginamit yung summation, for example. So what if that is 100,000 of codes? Di ba? So isa-isahin mo yun. So siguro kulang pa yung overtime mo. Di ba? Sa pag-edit. Ayan. So by relying on a single function definition instead of multiple instances of redundant code, the programmer frees herself to write only a single algorithm in just one place. Say, in a library module. Diba? Yan. So for example, yung ginamit nating math module, di ba? So ano yung nandun sa math module? So marami yun. So hindi mo na isa-isahin na ilalagay pa lahat. So i-call mo lang yung math na module or i-import mo lang yung math module. Then obviously, you can use all those functions na naka-loob or nasa loob ng math module. Yan. So yun yung tawag ng library module. So when the programmer needs to debug, repair, or improve the function, she needs to edit and test only the single function definition. Okay, so yun lang yung i-edit niya. So for example dito, yung sa kay doctor.py, di ba, tatlo yon. May main function, may change person, tsaka yung may reply functions tayo. So kung ito yung ito yung i-improve niya, so dito lang siya mag-i-edit mismo. So hindi niya na gagalawin yung ibang functions pa, like yung change person or yung main na function. Yan. Okay, isa na tayo. Okay. So hide complexity. Ayan. So another way that function serves as abstraction mechanism is by hiding complicated details. So to understand why this is true, so let's return to the summation function. So ano ba yung Although the idea of summing a range of numbers is simple, the code for computing a summation is not. Diba? So magpa-plus ka dyan. So gamit ka ng ilang operators. So we're not just talking about the amount or length of the code. So ito yung sinasabi natin. But also also about the number of interacting components. So instead na madali lang i-process ng computer mo yung program mo, baka mahirapan niyang i-load yung program mo. Kasi instead of 100 lines of code, napakahaba. Nasa 1,000 lines of code. Imagine, isa-isahin niya yun. From line 1 to line 1,000. Di ba? So, na-imagine nyo kung gaano ka-complex yung process nito. So, there are 3 variables to manipulate as well as count, control, loop, logic to construct. Yan. So, now, suppose somewhat unrealistically, that only one summation is performed in the program and no other program ever again. So, who needs a function now? Well, it depends on the complexity of the surrounding code. So, nasa sayo naman yan kung eto bang code na to is kailangan niya bang i-include siya sa defined functions. Pwede ko ba itong gawing defined functions? Pwede ko ba itong ma-upgrade in the future? Pwede ko ba itong ma-expand in the future? Or ano yung pwede ko pang ilagay dito in the future para may update ako? Ayan. So remember that programmers responsible for maintaining a program can wrap their brains around just a few things at a time. So magaling nila, no? Ang programming, makabubuang. Okay? Basta magbuang ka mo sa pag-program. So if the code for the summation is placed in a context of code that is even slightly complex, the increase of complexity or the increase in complexity might be enough to result in conceptual overload for the poor programmers. So, mahihirapan ka talaga. So, function call expresses the idea of a process to the programmer without forcing him or her to wade through the complex code that realizes that idea. So as in other areas of science and engineering, the simplest accounts and descriptions are generally the best. So kung saan yung pinakasimple, dun ka. The simpler, the better. Yan. So function supports general methods with systematic variations. So an algorithm is a general method for solving a class of problems. Diba? Sabi nga nila, pwede kang gumawa ng program na mag-solve ng integral. Diba? Pwede kang gumawa ng program na pwedeng mag-solve ng advanced math, diba? Mga Laplace transform. Diba? So for example, MATLAB, diba? Yung MATLAB is a program, is a software that used in mathematical calculations. Yan, yun yung example ng isang program. Yan. So the problem instances for our summation algorithm are the pairs of numbers that specify the lower and upper bounds of the range of numbers to be summed. So sa example so the problem instances of a given algorithm can vary from program to program or even within different parts of the same program. So when you design an algorithm, diba? Ano ganing algorithm? Diba? So may step-by-step process siya. So it should be general enough to provide a solution to many problem instances. So hindi pwedeng palipat-lipat. From step 3, then babalik ka step 1. Then babalik ka step 3 ulit. So dapat naka-systematic dapat. So not just one or a few of them. So in other words, a function should provide a general method with systematic variations. Yun yung ibig kong sabihin. Dapat meron kang systematic variations. So yung summation function contains both the code for the summation algorithm and the means of supplying problem instances to this algorithm. So the problem instances are the data sent as arguments in the function. And the parameters or argument names in the function's header behave like variables waiting to be assigned data whenever the function is called. Diba? So meron tayong assigned na parameters doon katabi ng naka-enclose siya katabi ng function name natin. Ayan. So if designed properly, so functions code captures an algorithm as a general method for solving a class of problems. So the functions arguments provide the means for systematically varying the problem instances that its algorithm solves. So additional arguments can be broaden the range of problems that are solvable. So base in the future ya, pwede mo siya mabutangan sa multiplication, not just for addition. Diba? So for example again, the summation function could take a third argument that specifies the step to take the between numbers in the range. So tingnan natin. So we will examine shortly how to provide additional arguments that do not add complexity to a function's default uses. Yan. So functions also support the division of labor. Ano yung division of labor? Ito yung parang hinahati mo yung yung task mo hinahati mo sa iba para mapadali, di ba? Yun din yun sa functions dito. Ayan. So in a well-organized system, whether it is a living thing or something created by humans, each part does its own job or plays its own role in collaborating to achieve a common goal. Specialized tasks get divided up and assigned to specialized agents. And some agents might assume the role of managing the tasks of others or coordinating them in some way. But regardless of the task, good agents mind their own business and they do not try to do the jobs of others. Ito naman talaga, di ba? Pero in real world talaga, may nakikisuyo. Di ba? Sir, pakisuyo naman ng ganito. Ikaw na munang gumawa nito. Sir, yan. Yeah. So, yung computer, yung pagko-code or yung program code, hindi ganyan. So, they mind their own business talaga. Okay, so, a poorly organized system, by contrast, suffers from agents performing tasks for which they are not trained or designed, or from agents who are busybodies who do not mind their own business. And then, this division of labor breaks down. So, wala nangyayari. So, in a computer program, functions can enforce a division of labor. Ideally, each function performs a single coherent task. Isa lang naman yung task talaga nila, di ba? Such as computing a summation or formatting a table of data or for output. Each function is responsible for using certain data, computing certain results, and returning these to the parts of the program that requested to them. So each of the tasks required by a system can be assigned to a function, including the task of managing or coordinating the use of other functions. So, tingnan natin mga strategies dito. Ayan, so meron tayong case study. Again, so this is a text analysis. Ayan. So in 1949, Dr. Rogel Flesch published The Art of Readable Writing. Yan. So in which he proposed a measure of text readability known as the Flesch index. So this index is based on the average number of syllables per word. Okay? And the average number of words per sentence in a piece of text. So index scores usually range from 0 to 100 and they indicate readable prose or prose for the following grade levels. Ayan. So meron tayo naka-define dyan na mga grade level of readability. Ayan. Based sa ating Flesch index, that is 0 to 30. So college, 50 to 60, high school, then 90 to 100, 4th grade. In this case study, we develop a program that computes the Flesch index for a text file. So ano yung request natin? So yung request dito is to write a program that computes, ito nga, it computes the Flesch index and grade level for text stored in a text file. Ayan. So analysis. So paano tayo gumawa nito? So first analyze natin kung ano yung data. Diba? So the input to this program is the name of the text file. Then the output are the number of sentences, words, and syllables in the file, as well as the file's Flesch index and grade level equivalent. So during analysis, we consult experts in the problem domain to learn any information that might be relevant in solving the problem. So for our problem, this information includes the definition of sentence, the word, and syllable. For the purpose of this program naman, these terms are defined in the table below. So for the word, so these are any sequence of non-white space characters. And for sentence, these are any sequence of words ending in a period, question mark, exclamation point, colon, or semicolon. And then in terms of syllable naman, so these are any word of 3 characters or less, or any vowels, that is A, E, I, O, and U, or pair of consecutive vowels, except for the final, that is ES, ED, or E, that is not LE. Yan. So ito yung analysis natin. So note that the definitions of words and sentence are approximations. So some words such as doubles and kettles end in ES, di ba? But will be counted as having 1 syllable. And an ellipsis, di ba? Will be counted as 3 syllables. So Flesk formula to calculate the index F is the following. So meron tayong ditong given formula. So given naman siguro to. So this is just an example, no? So kung gusto mo naman niya, let's say gusto mong kukunin yung yung let's say integral or the derivative of a function or derivative of a function. So gagamit ka rin ng formula, di ba? So yun din yun. So for this case study, ito yung formula natin. Yeah. So this is to calculate the index F and this is to calculate the grade level formula. Yeah. So design. Ayan, dito na tayo sa design. So this program will perform the following tasks. So receive the file name from the user, then open the file for input and input the text. Ito yung una-una. Diba? So basically, ito na yung start and end ng program. Diba? So receive the file name from the user, open yung file for input, and then input the text. Ito yung start mo. And then, ano susunod? What's the next step? So ito na yung algorithm natin. So count the sentences in the text. Then count the words in the text. And then count the syllables in the text. So meaning, sa text talaga tayo nag-base. After you get the numbers of sentence, words, and syllables, then you can have your computations na for Flesk index and for the grade level equivalent. Then after that, pag na-compute mo na, then ito na yung output mo or yung end ng program mo. Print these 2 values with appropriate labels as well as counts from tasks 2 to 4. So nandyan naman yan yung text analysis na PY. So you can just check sa ating model Neo LMS, no? Ayan. So meron tayong so we have I think 38 lines of codes, including the commented spaces. Ayan. So you can this one, you can pwede nyo siya magamit as your guide. Yeah. Okay. So this is the explanation. So the first and last task require no design. Yeah. So let's assume that the text is input in a single string from the file. Then it is processed in task 2 and 2 to 4. So, and then these 3 tasks can be designed as code segments that use the input string to produce an integer value. Yeah. So from string to integer. Then task 5, ito na yung magko-compute siya. So with the use of the integer value na kinuha natin or na-produce natin. So all the real work is done in the task that count the items. So ito na. So meron tayong task dito. So kakount yung sentences, count yung words, count yung syllables, compute yung Flesk index, and compute the grade level. Ayan. So, add the number of characters in text. Then of course, yung output niya nito is dapat naka-integer siya. Ayan. So, gagamit tayo ng count and split natin yung text per line. Yeah. So, the task is the most complex, or the last task is the most complex. So, for each word in the text, you must count the syllables in that word. So, imagine, no, kakount niyo yung word. Sige, ay iraran natin yung example. Tapos, kukunin natin yung wholesome philomer. Yan, share ko yung screen ko. Yan. Try natin na i-run natin to. Yan. Enter the file name. So, wholesome philomer.txt. Ayan. So, imagine, ito yung wholesome philomer na lyrics, di ba? Oh, sige nga, isa-isahin mo nga, try to get, di ba? Isa-isahin mo yung yung words dito. 1, 2, 3, 4. 'Di ba mahihirapan ka mag-count? Tapos kukunin mo pa yung mga syllables dito. 'Di ba? So ilang syllables 'yan per word. While with the use of this program, pag may ganito kang nagawang program, so automatically pag run mo, insert mo lang yung text file, makukuha mo na. So ito na 'yon. So apat na sentences, 104 words, 130 syllables. Yan. So this is just the example. Yan. A. So going back. Saan ba yan? Hindi. Ayan. Ayan. So implementation of coding. Ito na yung coding natin sa implementations. So the main tasks are marked off in the program code with a blank line and a comment. Yan. So refer na lang sa textanalysis.py. Yan. So na-test naman natin. So this kind of procedure is called bottom-up testing. Yeah, so each task is coded and tested before it is integrated into one overall program. So after you have written code for one or two tasks, you can test them in a short script. So pwede namang paisa-isa muna. Di ba? So pwede naman each, muna. Let's say, count lang muna yung sentences. Di ba? Then count, pag gumana siya, lalagay na natin, include natin yung words, count natin yung words. Then pag gumana naman siya, i-add na natin yung syllables. So meaning may tatlong process ka na. Sentence, kakount yung sentence, count yung words, then yung last is kakount yung syllables. So pwede naman yun. Diba? Doesn't matter as long as your program is running. Walang error. Yan. So meron pa pala flashDriver.py. So hindi siya naka-include. I will just upload it later sa NeoLMS. FlashDriver. Ayan, sige. So problem solving with top-down design. So one popular design strategy for programmers of any significant size and complexity is called top-down design. So ano yung top-down design? So this strategy starts with a global view of entire problem and breaks the problem into smaller or more manageable sub-problems, a process known as problem decomposition. So kumbaga, yung isang whole problem niya, parang inisa-isa niya yon, inisa-isa niya. So let's say, example siguro is kumuha ng hypotenuse. Diba? Kumuha ng hypotenuse. So ano yung first step mo dun? Diba? Isi-squared mo yung each side. Tapos i-add mo. Tapos i-square root mo yung buo. Diba? This is the square root of one side squared plus other side squared. Kuha mo yung hypotenuse. So, dun sa dito, pareho lang yun. So, kumbaga, gin isa-isa. Gin sipi-sipi. Kumbaga, yan. So, yun yung tinatawag nating problem decomposition. So, as each sub-problem is isolated, So meaning, let's say, na-solve mo na tong isa ka problem, then its solution is assigned to a function. So pwede mo na siya ma-separate. So problem decomposition may continue down to lower levels because the sub-problem might in turn contain two or more lower level problems to solve. So ito yung parang akala mo safe na yon, pero hindi pala. Related pala yung dalawang yun. Kaya nagkaka-error pa rin kahit na na-isolate mo na yung isa. Yan. So as functions are developed to solve each sub-problem, the solution to overall problem is gradually filled out in detail. So this process is also called stepwise refinement. Okay, so stepwise refinement. Ito yung parang uh, buklod-buklod lang una kasi dinidecompose mo pa yung yung problem sa code mo. And then ginamatamat mo siya plancha. Yan. So yan yung tinatawag nating stepwise refinement. Or inaayos mo siya para mag-run yung each code na yun. Ayan. So, our early program examples and exercises were simple enough that they could be or that they could be decomposed into three parts, di ba? So, yun yung input of data, then yung pag-process niya with the use of formulas, and then output of results. Di ba? Input, process, output. Yun lang yun. So, none of these parts required more than one or two statements of code. And they all appeared in a single sequence of statements. However, beginning with the text analysis program earlier, yung kanina, our case study problems became complicated enough to warrant decomposition and assignment to additional programmer-defined functions. Yung pagbilang ng words, ng sentences, at saka yung syllables. Diba? So, very complex. So, this section revisits each program to explore how their designs took shape. Yan. So titingnan natin kung saan ba dito o paano ba nila nito ginawa. Yan. So balik tayo dito. So meron tayong main function. Yan. So ito yung design of program na kanina. Di ba? So although we did not actually structure the text analysis program in terms of programmer-defined functions, we can now explore how that could be have done or how could have been done. Okay, so the program requires simple input and output components. So this can be expressed as statements within a main functions, yung sa taas. Ito. However, the processing of the input is complex enough to decompose into smaller sub-processes, such as obtaining the counts of sentences, words, syllables, and then calculating the readability scores using the flash index formula and the grade level formula. So generally you have or you develop a new function for each of these computational tasks. So pwede mo siya ma-define as a new function, define mo siya as a new function, and so on. Kasi sa example, if you can see, wala siyang defined function dito. Parang straight talaga siya from line 1 to line 37. So meaning isa-isahin na yan. Yeah. So a structure chart is a diagram that shows the relationships among a program's functions and the passage of data between them. Ayan. So ito na yung example natin. So aside sa flow chart, di ba? You already know what is a flow chart. So meron tayong tinatawag na structure chart din. Ayan. So this shows the relationship among the program's function. So input natin string, then labas natin is int. Input string, labas int, and so on. Ayan. So each box in the structure chart is labeled with a function name. Ito yung function name natin na gagamitin. And the main function at the top is where the design begins. And then yung pag-decompose natin leads to a lower level functions to which main depends. So the main function here depends on these sub-processes or sub-functions. So for example, the function count sentences. It takes a string as an argument and returns the number of sentences in that string. So note that all functions except one are just one below or just one level below the main. So wala siyang sub dito except dito sa syllables, no? So meron pa siyang sub dito. Ayan. Sa program naman na doctor, itong kay Eliza kanina, so ito naman yung structure niya. So from the main, then meron siyang reply, and then yung hinahandle ni reply is yung qualifiers, replacements, hedges, and yung mga data pools natin. Then under din niya si change person. So sa change person, kukuha siya ng random qualifiers, replacement, and hedges. And then siya, yan yung i-reply niya, babalik niya kay reply. Tapos yun yung isasabi niya kay main. Ayan. So the responsibility for responding is delegated to the reply functions. Reply function. So note that the two functions, main and reply, ito, have distinct responsibilities. So the job of main is to handle the user interaction with the program, whereas the reply is responsible for implementing the doctor logic of generating an appropriate reply based on the qualifiers, replacements, and hedges. Ayan. Okay, so yun din, no? Ayan, so yun na yun. Okay, so skip na tayo dito. Ayan, so meron tayong tinatawag na design with recursive functions. So in top-down design, you decompose a complex problem into a set of simpler problems, di ba? And then solve natin to with different functions. So in some cases, you can decompose a complex problem into smaller problems of the same form. So in these cases, the sub-problems can all be solved by using the same function. And this design strategy is what we call the recursive design. And the resulting functions are what we call the recursive functions. So defining a recursive functions is a function that a recursive function is a function that calls itself. Yun na yun. Pag tinawag mo siya, siya talaga yun. So to prevent a function from repeating itself indefinitely, it must contain at least one selection statement. So hindi ka pwede gumamit ng recursive function kasi hindi ka pwedeng gumamit ng recursive function na walang statement. Kasi pag ginawa mo yon, mag-i-infinite loop tayo. Okay? So this statement examines a condition called a base case to determine whether to stop or to continue with another recursive step. Ayan. Okay, so meron tayo dito, display range na defined function. Ayan. So let's examine how to convert an iterative algorithm to a recursive function. So here is a definition of a function display range that prints the numbers from a lower bound to an upper bound. Ayan. So, okay, so naka-define tayo dito. So how would we go about converting this function to recursive one? So ano first step natin? So first, we should note two important facts. No? So meron tayong loop dito, dito sa while function. Ito, meron tayong condition, lower is less than or equal to upper. Then ito yung ano niya, execute niya. When the function executes, lower is incremented by 1, but the upper never changes. Yan. So the equivalent recursive function performs similar primitive operations, but the loop is replaced with a selection statement. And the assignment statement is replaced with a recursive call of the function. So ito na yung changes natin. May pinagkaiba ba? Parang wala naman. Ito. Display range lower plus 1 upper. Ayan. Okay. So ito na yun. So although the syntax and design of the two functions are different, the same algorithm or algorithmic processes is executed. So the same magyapon, wala kita sang maging skip, no? So the same yapon, step by step pa rin. So each call of the recursive functions visits the next number of in the sequence, just as the loop does in the iterative version of the function. So kung titinan mo, di ba? So ito kasi naka-loop siya di ba? Ayan. Using the while. Ito, gumamit tayo ng if functions na. So, hindi ito naka-loop. Ito, hindi rin ito naka-loop. Ito naka-loop pala, ito hindi naka-loop. Pero with the use of recursive function. So, parang nag-loop din. Diba? Pero, the same na sila. The same use. Okay, the same use na sila. Yan. So, most recursive functions expects at least one argument. So, this data value is used to test for the base case that ends the recursive processes, and it is modified in some way before each recursive step. And so modification of the data value should produce a new data value that allows the function to reach the base case eventually. So in this case, display range, the value of the argument lower is incremented before each recursive call so that it eventually exceeds the value of the argument upper. Okay, so dito siya na part sa baba. So lower plus summation, then yung lower plus 1, then upper. So dito, yung sa return value, diba? Yan. Yan. So sa return value, kinuha natin yung summation again. So tinawag natin yung function niya. So para nag-loop na din siya. Diba? Okay. So this is the recursive functions. No? Yan. So ito naman yung example on how to trace a recursive functions. So this is a summation.py. Nandiyan din yan sa NeoLMS. Ayan. So you can try that out. No? Ayan. Okay, so tingnan natin. No? So we have lower, upper, and then margin. Ayan. So for example, meron tayong 1 na upper, lower na 4, and then yung margin at is 0. So returns the sum of the numbers from lower through upper and outputs a trace of the arguments and returns values on each call. Ayan. So yung sa first statement dito, so it computes the indentations, no? Ito, margin. Then, gumamit siya ng print. Ipiprint niya yung 2 arguments, yung blank tsaka result. Yan. Dito. So the value is computed. The value computed is also printed with this indentation or indentation just before each call returns. Yan. You can explore this one later on. Okay. So kung na-notice mo, no, medyo papalayo yung next statement or yung next value. So nag-increase siya by 1. Then increase by 1, 1, 1 until ma-reach niya yung 0. Then nag-decelerate ulit siya. Yan. Yan. So using recursive definitions to construct recursive functions. So we can also use recursive functions to design algorithms for computing values that have recursive definitions. So example nila is a Fibonacci sequence. You're familiar with that? Yung Fibonacci series natin. Okay. So ito yung formula niya. So you can check this out. Yan. So that is function name tayo na fib with an argument n. Wherein yung n natin is less than 3. So magre-return siya ng 1. Yan. And so on. Yan. So note that the base case as well as the 2 recursive steps return values to the caller. So bumabalik siya. Di ba? Dalawang return to. Yan. And yan. So may if-else tayo statement dito. Yan. So meron din tayong infinite recursion. Okay, so ano yung infinite recursion dito? So recursive function tends to be simpler than the corresponding loops, no? But if they still require thorough testing, so one sign error might trip up or a programmer occurs when a function can critically continue executing forever. So in this situation, uh, talaga may experience yung infinite recursion. Diba? Pero si Python, ano naman yan, magpa-prompt naman yan ng error. Just like this one. Line 3 in run forever. Yan. Yan. So maximum recursion depth exceeded in comparison. So meaning meron siya na-detect na infinite recursion. So infinite recursion arises when the programmer fails to specify the base case or to reduce the size of the problem in a way that terminates the recursive processes. So kung hindi mo kabisado yung recursion na function or recursive functions, divide mo na lang siya as a defined functions, di ba? Yan. So in fact, the Python virtual machine eventually runs out of memory resources to manage the process, so it halts execution with a message indicating stack overflow error. Ayan. So mag-e-error talaga siya. So the system keeps calling run forever one until there is no memory left to support another recursive call. Unlike an infinite loop, an infinite recursion eventually halts execution with an error message. Diba? So kung hindi ka gumamit ng recursion loops, no, or infinite recursion, so hindi mo malalaman kung talagang may loop talaga sa program mo. Diba? So, pag-run mo, let's say, pag-run ng program mo, gumana naman siya. Pero you did not know na that some part of your program keeps on looping, na nag-consume ng maraming memories sa system mo. And then eventually, after 1 hour siguro na ginagamit mo yung program mo, nakakibot ka na lang, nag-close siya. Diba? Walang error. Gumagana, pero nag-close siya. Because sometimes, you cannot avoid that mistakes, no? Especially kung mabilisan na pag-code, di ba? You did not double check your code, di ba? So, may experience mo talaga yan. Okay, so we have here the cost and benefits of recursion. I think last topic na lang. So, although recursive solutions are often more natural and elegant than their iterative counterparts, they come with a cost. So the runtime system on a real computer such as the PVM or the Python virtual machine must devote some overhead to recursive function calls. So at program startup, the PVM reserves an area of memory called the call stack. So medyo advanced na ni siya. Sa computer systems na ni siya. No? Okay. And then ito yung gagamitin niya na para mag-store siya ng data. Just like your variables, your temporary storage, dyan yan. Yan yung tinatawag natin. Then when a call returns, let's say kukunin mo na yung value ng variable na yun, dun sa memory na yan. So dyan siya ini-execute or dyan siya tinatawag. Ayan. Okay. So yeah, when a call returns or completes its execution, the return address is used to locate the next instruction in the caller's code. And the memory for the stack frame is mababakante. Okay? Mababakante siya. So the stack frames for this process generated by display range 1, 3. Ito. So the frames in the figure include storage for the function's arguments only. So lower upper, lower upper, lower upper, lower upper. So meron kang 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. Ayan. So yung range niya 1 to 3. Okay. Okay, yun. So we will discuss the remaining topics, the higher order functions and lower order functions by next meeting. Okay. So I will just give in advance your laboratory 6. Actually, by ano pa ni siya, by Friday. I will just give it out to you para masubmit nyo siya by next week pa man. Okay, next week pa man. Ayan. So, before we end our discussion for this afternoon, may I know if you have some questions, clarifications?
Answer.
Wala. So, okay. So, that's it, no? Thank you for attending our class and see you by Friday sa next meeting natin. Okay? Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.